Researchers now believe that chronic low-grade inflammation is the underlying driver of nearly every major disease associated with aging. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, certain cancers, even arthritis. The same biological process, running underneath all of them. Scientists have a name for it, inflammaging. It was first described and named by Italian researcher Dr. Claudio Franceschi in the year 2000. And in the 2 decades since, the research literature on it has grown dramatically. It now sits near the center of how serious geroscientists, scientists who study aging at the biological level, think about why we get sick as we get older. Here's the part that's unsettling. Most people over 60 already have it, without any obvious symptoms, without any pain, without any signal that something is wrong. By the end of this video, you'll know about a specific blood test you can ask for at your next physical. Most doctors don't order it unless you ask. That reveals your level of systemic inflammation. And I'll give you the 4 foods that drive inflammaging most, and the 4 that actively work against it. Let's start with understanding what's actually happening inside your body. To understand inflammaging, you need to understand something called a senescent cell. As your cells age, some of them reach a point where they stop functioning normally, but they don't die the way they're supposed to. Instead, they go into a kind of suspended state. Scientists call this cellular senescence. And these cells do something that creates a very big problem. They start secreting, continuously, a mix of inflammatory compounds, proteins, enzymes, signal molecules, collectively known as the SASP. That stands for the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. And what these compounds do is signal to your immune system in a continuous loop. Danger, damage, respond. Your immune system responds every day, every hour, at a low, steady level that never quite turns off. That is the slow fire. That's inflammaging. Unlike acute inflammation, which is what happens when you cut your hand and it heals in a week, this form has no off switch. It is not fixing anything. It is not responding to an injury that will resolve. It is simply on. Why does this matter? Because of what that sustained immune activation does downstream. CRP, C-reactive protein, is a marker your liver produces in response to inflammation. When it's chronically elevated, it predicts cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes. This is not a subtle association. The relationship between elevated CRP and cardiac outcomes is one of the most replicated findings in cardiovascular research. IL-6, interleukin-6, one of the inflammatory compounds senescent cells secrete, is associated with cognitive decline. Elevated IL-6 in midlife predicts worse memory and processing speed years later, and a signaling pathway called NF-κB, which inflammaging activates, connects chronic inflammation directly to cancer progression. It doesn't cause cancer on its own, but it creates an environment in which certain cancers are more likely to grow and spread. One fire, multiple fronts. Now the blood test, it's called high-sensitivity CRP, written as hsCRP. It measures the same C-reactive protein we just discussed, but at a level of precision standard CRP tests can't achieve. And it is not a standard part of most routine blood panels. You have to ask for it, those exact words. I'd like to add an hsCRP to my next blood panel. Most physicians will order it without hesitation. Here's what the numbers mean. Under 1 milligram per liter, low risk. Your systemic inflammation is well controlled. 1 to 3, moderate risk, worth paying attention to. Above 3, high risk. This is where the cardiovascular and cognitive associations become statistically significant. If you don't know your number, this is one of the most useful things you can add to your next appointment. Write it down, hsCRP. It costs almost nothing, and it tells you something genuinely important. 4 foods that drive inflammaging. And I want to be specific because eat less junk food is not useful advice. Number 1, ultra-processed foods. These are foods manufactured with industrial ingredients that don't exist in a home kitchen. Emulsifiers, artificial colorings, flavor chemicals, stabilizers. They trigger an immune response in ways that whole foods with the same calorie count do not. The mechanisms are still being studied, but the inflammatory association is consistent across large observational studies. Number 2. Refined sugars. Excess sugar drives a process called glycation. It damages proteins and DNA, and it elevates blood glucose in ways that directly activate inflammatory pathways. This includes sugar-sweetened beverages specifically, which are among the most damaging forms. Number 3. Refined seed oils in excess. Soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil. When consumed in the quantities common in a Western processed food diet, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio they create in the body tips strongly toward an inflammatory state. The key word is excess. Small amounts in a whole food diet are not the problem. Industrial quantities in fried food and packaged goods are. Number 4. Excess alcohol. Alcohol is directly hepatotoxic at high doses and disrupts the gut microbiome in ways that increase intestinal permeability, sometimes called leaky gut, which sends a continuous stream of bacterial compounds into the bloodstream that your immune system responds to as foreign invaders. 4 foods that actively reduce it. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal that works through the same pathway as ibuprofen. It inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes. This is not folk medicine. This is biochemistry. The dose that produces this effect is roughly 3 to 4 tablespoons per day. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel. The EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acids in these fish directly compete with and reduce the production of pro-inflammatory compounds in the body. 2 to 3 servings per week is the dose where research consistently finds benefit. Turmeric with black pepper. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, has documented anti-inflammatory activity, but its bioavailability on its own is poor. Pairing it with black pepper, which contains piperine, increases absorption by up to 2,000%. If you supplement with curcumin, this combination matters. Leafy greens. Dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, arugula, are dense with polyphenols that work through multiple anti-inflammatory pathways. They also support gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, which in turn help regulate immune activation at the cellular level. One more thing, and this is the most important. Diet matters enormously for Inflammaging. Sleep matters. Sleep deprivation directly raises CRP levels, and chronic sleep loss accelerates the inflammatory process significantly. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which in sustained doses drives inflammation through multiple channels. But exercise is the single most powerful anti-inflammatory intervention we know of. Not a drug, not a supplement. Aerobic exercise, specifically Zone 2, the conversational pace we've covered in other videos on this channel, reduces circulating inflammatory markers measurably. It does this in part by promoting the clearance of senescent cells, and in part by reducing visceral fat, which is itself a source of pro-inflammatory compounds. If you're walking 30 minutes 5 days a week, you are doing more for your Inflammaging levels than any supplement stack currently available. The science on this is not close. Ask for the hsCRP at your next appointment. One question, one line on a blood panel. It tells you where you actually stand. And if you want to understand Zone 2 cardio in detail, what it is, how to know you're hitting it, and why it specifically matters for inflammation, that video is right here. It's the most practical follow-up to what we covered today.